welcome in. It's Big Ten Today on a Tuesday. We are presented by CDW. Great to have you with us, Dave Revson and Rafael Davis. We are 4 days away from March. We are 3 weeks away from March Madness, and we are getting fired up for all of the above.
No, it's big time. And as this league becomes more of an offensive-minded league, last night was a night for me. A guy that loves defense, a guy that loves toughness and the fight. Because I know coaches right now, you want to get up and down. You want to shoot a bunch of threes. But last night in Lincoln, Nebraska, Michigan, Nebraska, 95 points combined, only 11 made threes. Both teams combined to shoot under 30% from the field. That's my type of basketball. I love them games.
Well, beauty's in the eye of the beholder, I guess. I mean, that was a rough one. My wife, who really doesn't follow this stuff very much at all, I'm letting her secrets out, right? But, you know, she tolerates it. But she walked in a few different times and said, "That's the score?"
That's big time ball.
Yeah.
That's Big Ten basketball. That's how I want to see it. That's how I love it.
Yeah, well, all right. You're the one, I suppose. Mike DeCourcy is with us as well. And Mike, we won't ask you necessarily for your reactions to Michigan, Nebraska, other than how they impact the bracket. I know a new bracket out today. You're going to do the seed list every day on foxsports.com. I mean, we are in the heart of it now.
Oh, absolutely. We officially, there is a bubble now. The teams that are on it sweat every game they play. There's none of this February 2nd bubble talk when you still have a dozen games left. No, this is the heart of it. If you have 3 or 4 games remaining and you have not clearly established yourself as an NCAA tournament team, looking at you, Ohio State, looking at you, Indiana and Nebraska, you guys have some things that you have to get done, and I think you all know what those things are. It's the best time. To me, as much as I love March Madness, and it's wonderful, I really love this time of year, all the pressure and the tension about trying to get in and get yourself seated well.
I agree with you. And look, part of it, I think, is our perspective, too. Like, for us, the Big Ten tournament is our biggest event of the year that we televise here on the Big Ten Network. So, I mean, that's part of it, too, is kind of the jockeying for position, heading into the tourney, getting excited about that. But, yeah, I mean, there's just something, as Mike said, for getting into the tournament. There's so many teams who that's their goal, and the rubber meets the road here as teams try to get in. That is our big story today. It is Mike's latest bracket. And the bracket math this morning giving us 9 Big Ten teams in the field. So that is down 1 from Friday, and that one that it's down is Ohio State. The Buckeyes are now out after losing 3 in a row. Michigan State, the highest seeded team, they are a 2. Wisconsin's a 3. You see Maryland and Michigan are 4s. Purdue down to a 5. UCLA, Oregon, they're both 7 seeds. Illinois is now an 8. Nebraska a 10. As I mentioned, the Buckeyes are the first team out. Indiana just a couple of spots behind them. All right, let's start going team by team, and we start with Michigan State. And I think it's fair to say, Mike, that probably no team has had a better last 10 days or so than the Spartans have. Illinois, Purdue, and Michigan, they have beaten them in succession. They are a 2 seed now. I will say this, like, you look at the resumes ahead of them, and they are really, really good. But I guess I'm just curious, particularly given, and we've talked about this a ton, like Michigan State has a very difficult schedule down the stretch. Every game's a quad 1 game. They've won 3 quad 1 games here in succession. Would it be possible for them to get to a 1 seed? What would have to happen?
Yeah, very difficult. I think they'd have to win them all and then make the final of the Big Ten tournament. Remember, we know that the final itself, unless there's a potential bid steal, unlikely that will be considered by the NCAA committee because it goes so close to the actual selection show. But if they get there and they won all these games, then I think they could make a strong case that they have done as much as anybody short of Auburn. But you're looking now at 8-4 quad 1 record, really strong. And then, as you said, those 4 consecutive quad 1 games, 3 of them against NCAA tournament opponents at Maryland, Wisconsin, and Michigan at home, plus an at Iowa in there. So that's a ton of difficult games for them to manage. But I think that if they can do reasonably well in there, remember, they are toward the bottom, I hate to use the word bottom, but they are toward the edge of the 2 line. So they have to perform well in those games to hang on to that too, and I think that's a very realistic goal.
I am so excited for the game tomorrow night. You get Michigan State traveling to College Park to play Maryland. That's going to be big time here on our network tomorrow evening. But when I look at Michigan State, it's been all about the development of Jason Richardson over the last few weeks. He has been balling. Last 5 games, the freshman's averaging 17 points a contest. And in the league where there's so many talented freshmen, Jason Richardson may be right there at the top of the list when it comes to basketball IQ. And then they're getting production from Trey Holloman, because you look at it, Jace Richardson essentially replaced Trey Holloman in that starting lineup, and a lot of guys would go to the bench and they feel bad about themselves. Some of them would even think about transferring. We've seen guys in this league quit their team mid-season because of playing time, and Trey Holloman took it right on the chin. Not only did he go to the bench and accept it, but he's been balling, averaging up close to 13 points over the last 5 games. And then you look inside, they've been getting production. You may look at a box sheet and say Jackson Kohler isn't producing, Cooper Carson isn't producing, but combined, they're giving you a double-double every night. They are rolling at the right time, and they're playing the game the right way.
Well, they are. They are defending. I mean, you look at these last 3 games, last 4 minutes of the last 3 games, they have outscored all quad 1 opponents, as we talked about, by a combined 30-9.
Oh, that's crazy.
In the last 4 minutes of those games. And kudos to Harold Shelton, our great researcher, for unearthing that.
Tough.
But, I mean, it really tells you how well they have guarded here down the stretch. I'm with you. Jace Richardson is their best player.
Baller.
Right now.
NBA player, lottery pick.
Man, he's been phenomenal. All right, let's get to Wisconsin. They saw their 5-game winning streak end in pretty surprising fashion, I would say. I mean, to be up 14 with less than 7 minutes to go at home against Oregon. They had a win expectancy of 99%.
Dang.
And lost that game. I mean, again, like you think of Wisconsin and things they do well, they don't turn it over, they shoot free throws great. Like, they're just not the kind of team that loses a game like that. But, you know, I don't want to dwell too much on that, Mike, because they had been so good leading up to that, and their spot in the NCAA tournament right now reflects that.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Wisconsin is up until those final 7 minutes, they never did anything that you didn't expect. Every team they played that they were supposed to beat, they did. They have no quad 3 or quad 4 defeats, and until that one, they didn't have any quad 2 losses. Everybody they had lost to was among the very best. And then they were able to get that big win against Purdue on the road, and so then they did something you didn't expect on the positive side. It's really tough to distinguish Wisconsin's resume. The 3-line is a real jumble. You have teams with very poor predictive metrics and great resume metrics and vice versa. So it's really hard to pin down what the 3-line, what order it should be. But I think Wisconsin fits firmly into that neighborhood. As long as they don't do anything to hurt themselves the rest of the year, I think they'll be a pretty solid 3. But it's very interesting. I mean, how are they better than St. John's? How are they better than Michigan? It's really an interesting conversation to have.
Well, I will say one way how they're better than St. John's or Michigan, because every time they step on the floor, they may have the best player out there. John Tonje has been outstanding. He's right there, one of the 4, maybe 5 players in the Big Ten Player of the Year race. Been averaging close to 25 points a game over the last 9 games. Like, some guys can do it 2-3 games in a row, but this has been 9 games. But it cannot be just John Tonje, because he was outstanding in that first half against Oregon, but he struggled in that second half. Oregon adjusted. TJ Bamba was big time. But you see guys like John Blackwell, Max Klesmit, they struggled. Those 2 guys have got to come to play. John Blackwell cannot have a night off. John Blackwell cannot go through a sophomore slump right now. He's got to be a consistent scorer, being able to get to the basket. And Max Klesmit, 17 on the road at Purdue, but 13 points the last 2 games combined. He's got to be there for those guys.
And even Tonje in that game against Oregon down the stretch didn't shoot it great from 3 really the entire game. They've got Washington at home tonight. You would expect them to get back on track. They're pretty manageable schedule down the stretch for the Badgers. But again, they go to Michigan State this weekend. Speaking of Michigan State, and Rafael already talked about the huge game coming up against Maryland tomorrow here on the Big Ten Network. They have a top 4 seed right now, Mike. The computers really love them. This is a team that has been playing very well. They're limited a bit in terms of depth, and we've talked about that quite a bit. But, man, they have been as good as anyone here over the last 6 or 7 weeks.
They have, and what they've started to do is win those games down the stretch. That's what they've become so much better at that. And that has reflected in the quality of their resume. You've seen them start to escalate. I mean, I think I had them in an 8-9 neighborhood maybe a month ago, and now all the way up to here. It's a great situation for the Terps. I obviously really think they're a terrific team, but the resume has gotten stronger and stronger. And if they're able to get that Michigan State game, it changes the math for them entirely. At that point, they maybe start to talk even as high as a number 3 seed, which would be a remarkable drive from where they were just a month ago.
The computers love Maryland, and I love Maryland because they're the best team in the conference. They're the most talented team. You look at that starting 5, maybe the best starting 5 in the country. And you talk about depth and not get it. But let me ask you one question.
Yes,
if you put Selton Miguel to the bench, and say you put Tafari Gapari when he's healthy, you put him in the starting lineup, or Deshaun Harris-Smith in the starting lineup, Maryland still have the best starting lineup in the league?
I mean, look, I love that. I think Jacoby Gillespie.
Exactly, yeah.
Like, we should be talking more about Jacoby Gillespie.
Exactly.
For first team all conference.
I'm
like,
with you.
He's been that good. He is their leading scorer
with you.
over the last 12 games. Like, they've won
Yes.
10 of 12. He's their leading scorer. So I guess I didn't answer your question. I evaded
No,
a little
you
bit.
did. You did.
But I love their front court, and I love their guards.
Yes.
If you took one of those guards off the court, would they still be the best starting lineup? I have to go through and analyze it, but they'd be in the discussion.
No, but yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They have possibly 3 all Big Ten caliber players, maybe first or second team. You can make an argument Jacoby Gillespie should be first team all Big Ten. You can make an argument for Derek Queen. You look at it, he could be in the player of the year conversation. He's been averaging 19 points, 12 rebounds over the last 5 games, really contributing and winning. And Julian Reese, their cleanup guy, is right there, top 3 big men in this conference, averaging a double-double over the last 3 games. I could even make an argument for Rodney Rice making a third all Big Ten team. This is his ability to score that basketball. Maryland, they're special. They can win games. They're going to make damage in that Big Ten tournament. They're a sleeper in the NCAA tournament. I think they can go deep, make a deep run.
And speaking of that Big Ten tournament, in prime position to get a double bye in the Big Ten tourney right now. What about Michigan? Raphael loved the game last night.
Loved it.
Against Nebraska. It was ugly. It's the first time they won a game when scoring fewer than 50 points since 2008.
That's beautiful.
It has been a while. How about this? It was the first game in all of college basketball this year. I mean, there have been, thousands of games, right? It was the first game in all of college basketball where neither team was over 0.75 points per possession.
That is crazy.
Yeah. A
rock fight.
But you loved it. Anyway, a 4 seed as of this morning. I mean, they keep doing this, Mike. They win close games, but the bottom line is they win.
Absolutely. It's interesting because after that game was over, I sort of saw the sequel to that. Texas Tech and Houston was a lot like that. They weren't exactly playing in the hundreds either. And the reason I bring that up is because of the fact that I put Michigan on the 4 line, at the very top of the 4 line, and I just don't know whether, although I like their resume better than Texas Tech's, the committee really liked Texas Tech in that bracket reveal a couple of weeks ago, so I stayed with the Red Raiders as a 3 even after that. But I look at the 2, and it's going to be very difficult for the committee to decide if it's similar situation in a couple of weeks, because the predictive metrics for Texas Tech are overwhelming, just as the results metrics for Michigan are overwhelming, and then each is coincided by the lower of the reverse metrics. So it's very interesting to sort of compare these teams and contrast them. But for me, I would put Michigan as a 3 if I didn't think that the committee had so much respect for what Texas Tech has done metrically.
And that's where I think the net comes into big play. It comes into picture way too many times. So you look at the non-conference, you look even in conference, I think there's a much harder chance of a team going out there and winning close games and beating in-conference opponents on the road in tough environments and closing out those games compared to beating a non-conference team by 30 or 40 points. Yeah, you have to get that win, but it doesn't mean the same. Who did you beat? When did you beat them? How did you beat them? But I look at this Michigan team, and you mentioned it. A win is a win. But I look at how how they win games. Close teams win close games. Connected teams, they find ways to win. In Michigan, they just show you they can beat you in multiple ways. They can beat you in grinded out wins in a half-court game. They guard you. Righty Gale, Trey Donaldson, big time. And then they shown you this season they can get up and down. They can run out in transition. They can make 15, 17 threes in a basketball game. And they can beat you on the glass. Vlad Golden, Danny Wolf tearing up the offensive glass, getting second chance points. They have toughness. They have defense. And then when it comes to following the scouting report, they are big time. They have winners in that locker room, and everyone knows what's going on, and everyone's bought into the same goal.
I would say they got better and better on the defensive end as the year's gone on, too. And to Mike's point, I mean, you look at the resume, 8 quad one wins.
Crazy.
Only 3 teams in the country have more than 8 quad one wins. So that's pretty good. Lots more to come on the show. Still a bunch of teams to get to, including the struggling Boilers, as well as UCLA and Oregon. Those 3 teams coming up next on Big Ten Today. Been a rough couple weeks for Purdue. 4 straight losses. First time that's happened since just before COVID shut everything down 5 years ago. Remember, they'd won 4 in a row prior to that. And as you would expect, they're scoring fewer points and allowing more points than they were during the win streak. The drop-off particularly severe on the offensive end in terms of raw scoring. But if you look at efficiency, it's actually the defense which has suffered the most. Opponents with an effective field goal percentage of better than 60% in that stretch, which is among the 10 worst in the nation. And yet, Mike, there's still a lot of great stuff on that resume. They've got 7 quad one wins. They only have 1 loss outside of the top quad. You have them as a 5 seed. I know they were a lot higher just a couple weeks ago, but give us a sense of what you see from Purdue resume-wise.
But the beauty, Dave, of the NCAA tournament selection process, it's not a poll. It's not the AP poll where, oh, what did you do yesterday? Okay, that's how good you are. That's not how sports work, and it's not how the NCAA works this. Everything that Purdue accomplished from the time that the season started, including the win over Alabama, all factors into what they're considered. And as a result, they are very much in the picture for a top 5 NCAA tournament seed, and they could change that back to higher on the bracket if they were able to succeed down the stretch. If you look at their schedule, they've played a really difficult schedule. You're in the SEC right now. You're probably, like if you're Auburn, you've probably played a more difficult schedule. But there are maybe only 2 or 3 teams in the country that have played a more challenging schedule than Purdue, and they have achieved significant results against that. They're now under 500 against quad 1, 7, and 8, but 14-9 against quads 1 and 2 combined. That's a really solid resume.
And it doesn't get easier. You look at their schedule coming up. UCLA comes to town this week. Then you look at Rutgers, and you may look at their schedule and think that they are maybe an easy win. But it's 2 top 5 draft picks coming into Mackey Arena. And then you go to Champaign to finish out the season. And you look at this squad, and to me, I was in that locker room, and Coach Painter would always tell us, if you don't like the hole you're in, you got to stop digging. And Purdue has got to stop digging that hole. And I think it starts at the top. It starts with their leadership, because we spend so much time talking about the departure of Zach Edey on both ends of the floor, but we haven't spent a lot of time talking about what his leadership meant in that locker room. Zach was a leader. Zach would show up early. He leave late. He talked to guys. He hang out with guys. He was a connector, but not just Zach Edey. It was Mason Gillis in that locker room bringing guys together. Ethan Morton maybe not played that much minutes in the season ago, but he was a guy in the locker room that everybody could come to, everybody could talk to, everyone could learn from. And then Lance Jones on the defensive end, because that's been a problem. There was a time when I was growing up, you go to a Purdue game in Mackey Arena, you see Chris Kramer, defense lives here. Defense has not lived for Purdue these last 4 games. They got to pick it up on that end of the floor if they want to find their hopes and reach their goals for the season.
You do wonder how much of it is just personnel-based, like as you talked about, Zach Edey being gone, Daniel Jacobson being out for the year. I mean, people have feasted on them inside. I know you've talked about the guards not being able to cut off the dribble drives, and that's an issue on the perimeter. But the interior,
for sure.
Is it solvable? I don't know. We will see here. And again, haven't been great on the offensive end. Braden Smith, 2 straight games with 6 turnovers, very uncharacteristic for him. So as Raphael mentioned, Purdue's got UCLA coming in Friday, and UCLA had that great stretch, Mike, where they won 7 in a row. They were the hottest team, I'd say, in the Big Ten at that point. Just 2-2 since then, but still really solid NCAA tourney resume. The thing that concerns you a little bit is you don't want to dip into that 8-9 game.
Absolutely. And I think they're more toward the 6 line right now than they are toward the 7. But one thing about them is that their metrics are very consistent. They are the same numerically in the results metrics and the predictive metrics. They're 7-7 against quad 1, 12-7 against 1 and 2 combined, only 1 quad 3 loss. So the nice thing about them is that you don't have to sort of figure out who they are. They're telling you who they are. Right now they're telling you that they're a 7 seed, but that Purdue game, if they were able to get that one, a road win against a solid quad 1 game, that would be enormous for the Bruins. We'll see whether they can pull that off.
When I think about UCLA, I got to give a big shout out to a guy, Sky Clark. Sky Clark has been big time since being called delusional by his head coach. He's went out there and took that right to the chin and balled out. Averaged 12 points a game over the last 2 months and shooting at a 47% clip from the three-point area, taking 4 to 5 attempts per game. You need guard play to win big games. Sky Clark has given them that. Adai Mara gives them something on both ends. He's blocking shots. He's being a disruptor inside. He's a guy you can throw the ball into down low, and he can make a move right or left hand, and then they just guard you. We know UCLA will guard you. So I'm so curious of that defense traveling to West Lafayette, because when you look at when Purdue struggled, it's been against quick, fast, disruptive guards. You think Bruce Thornton, Ace Baldwin, Trey Holloman, and Jeremy Fears. That's what UCLA presents. That defense travels with them. That guard matchup between Dylan Andrews and Sky Clark, Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith, that's going to be the game. Purdue's going to have to figure that out, because UCLA, they can turn you over and they can get you in a hurry.
Fascinated to see how they fare in that game. And then the other two, frankly, at Northwestern, home against USC. I mean, even if you just win 2 of those 3, you'd come into the Big Ten tournament feeling pretty good. But again, the equation changes dramatically if you're able to get 3 wins, including that one at Purdue. So they are one of 2 newcomers in the league that obviously is going to make the NCAA tournament. The other one is Oregon, and they went through that really rough patch where we were concerned about them. They have come out the other side, 4 straight wins now. The latest, probably the most impressive, the rally against Wisconsin that we were talking about. Badgers were up by 14 in the closing minutes there, and Oregon able to pull it out. And Mike, for people who don't know, who haven't followed Oregon, who may be Big Ten fans, and Oregon was kind of out of sight, out of mind, this is what Dana Altman does. He's great in February, and he's just great all around. I mean, they win 20 games. They've won 20 games every single year he's been there.
And when they have had difficult seasons that mandated that they needed to win the league tournament, for instance, in the Pac-12 to get in, they did that too. That is Dana. Dana is as good. I know we've renamed March Izzo, but Dana Altman is there saying, hey, if you want to rename it again, we can try that. Or the interesting thing about their resume is how disparate it is. Probably a bigger disparity in their resume metrics and results and their predictive metrics as any team in the country. And it's a little bit different than Michigan winning all those close games. I think Oregon has had some tough losses that have damaged them, but they have so many high-quality wins. 9-6 against Quad 1. That's a huge number of Quad 1 wins. You were talking about earlier about how 8 is a lot. Well, 9 is more than 8. So I probably am a little light on Oregon in my seed line. But I think if Oregon can take care of business down the stretch, they have all games against teams that are outside the field right now, although Indiana's knocking on the door. All games outside. If they take care of business down the stretch, I think at that point they are a solid 6 seed.
Yeah, and the way they take care of business, Nate Biddle has to be the Nate Biddle that we've seen over the last 4 games. Nate Biddle has been outstanding, almost sensational. Been scoring the ball at a high level, been playing inside and out, not just settling for jump shots. His production on both ends of the floor have been big time. And in Jackson Shellstad, you throw him in there, the shot he made at Wisconsin was huge. Even the shot he made at Iowa.
He's a big shot maker, man.
Shot maker.
That's what he does.
Tough dudes take tough shots and they make them. And Jackson Shellstad has been that. You need your point guard to have that confidence. But what I've enjoyed most over this winning stretch has been their toughness, both mentally and physically, because we've seen this year sometimes Oregon can get punked out. Things don't go right offensively. They get down a bit. There's been times where they look like they've quit. There've been times where they look like they've been sent home. And you look at that game at Wisconsin, they just kept at it. They just kept chipping at it. And that's the type of mentality that the Ducks have to continue to have. But Nate Biddle, you got to continue to play at this all-conference level.
I am always impressed with teams that go through a rough patch and come out on the other side because you had to dig deep, you had to do some soul searching. and they figured it out. And again, I don't want to give too much credit to the coach because ultimately it's the players that have to do it. But Dana Altman knows the buttons to push. I mean, I mentioned they've won 15 years. He's been there 15 years now. They've won 20 games. They've done it 11 times ever before he showed up. 11 times ever. Done it 15 years in a row. We're going to get to the rest of the bracket next. The slumping Illini and Huskers. Plus, what will it take for the Bucks to get back in and for the Hoosiers to crack the field? Mike's going to let us know next. Tomorrow, don't miss a huge hoops tripleheader. Every single game involving at least one tourney hopeful. First, we've been talking about it, Michigan State battling the Terps, a top 20 showdown there. Then we've got Indiana hosting Penn State, followed by Ohio State and USC. Coverage begins with the tip-off show, 6 Eastern, 3 Pacific, only on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. So 3 games tomorrow, 3 games tonight as well. That includes Illinois and Iowa. And man, do the Illini need a win. 3 straight losses. Mike, you made a great point earlier. You've made many great points. But what you made earlier was the notion that, hey, every game is just one game. And the beauty of the way that this process works is you take the entire season into consideration. And no one is happier for that fact than Illinois, because it was ugly what happened Saturday night at Madison Square Garden. I mean, literally the worst loss in terms of margin of defeat in school history. I think it hurts even more that the whole country's watching, right? I mean, that is a showcase game in prime time, so everyone saw what happened. And now, Mike, again, not just because of that game, but because of what's been happening here over the last couple of weeks, they are in that 8-9 game. What do you make of Illinois? Give people a sense for this resume.
I think you have to look at the fact that they have played 16 quad 1 games. There's 6-10 in them, so obviously not on the right side of that. But 16 quad 1 games, there are only 2 teams that I found that have played as many. Kentucky and Auburn are the only teams that I found in the top end of the net that played 16 quad 1 games to date. And that's obviously worn on this team. They have had injury problems, illness problems that have affected their rotation and the consistency of their performances. But they still have, down the stretch, hey, you want to talk about quad 1 games? Where here's 3 more. Iowa, 2 more. Iowa at home, then at Michigan, and then Purdue. That's opportunities for the Illini to redefine who they are. We know how talented they are. We know how good they have been at times in victories, and even in the defeat against Tennessee at home back in December, they were outstanding, just not in the final 4 minutes. So we know what they're capable of, and they have to get back to that to take a serious run at getting out of that 8-9 game.
And Mike, I say this with so much love because I love you. But I don't care that Illinois has played tough games. I don't care that they played 16 quad 1 games. That shouldn't wear on you. That's what you signed up for. That's what you came to play at Illinois. You came to the Big Ten. You wanted to play big-time opponents. And injuries and illness, that's a part of the game. You still have able bodies to go out there and compete. Because you lose by 43 points, that's not on coaching. That's not on strategy. That's on the guys in the locker room. That's not having pride. That's not going out there and competing at the highest level. Because you look at it, yeah, they're playing with freshmen. And freshmen, I'm a guy that freshmen can still win you games. Kasperjak has shown us is a big-time player. Tomislav Ivicic can get the job done. But they need their older guys to help them. They need their veterans. You go back to 2012 when that Kentucky team, when they won a national championship, and they had freshmen at Anthony Davis, Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, Marcus Teague in that starting lineup. They had guys like Terrence Jones. They had guys like Darius Miller off the bench, or even Deron Lamb, older guys that went out there and taught the young guys how to compete at a high level. Madison Square Garden was not a great performance. Last 3 games, Illinois is allowing 94 points a game. That has to make Brad Underwood's stomach hurt every night. They've got to be better on that end of the floor.
Well, I love you too, Raphael, but 16 is still more than everybody.
Yeah.
13 is okay, or 12
But that's
or
what you
14,
come here
but
for.
16 is a ton.
But that's what you come here. You come here to
no one else
play.
did that.
But that's what Coach Underwood's a tough guy. He's a physical guy. He wants to go out there. I'm not afraid of anyone. I want to play everyone, and I want to prepare for the March Madness. That's what college players sign up for. You look at it, they've been playing tough games their whole life, whether they're in the EYBL, Adidas circuit, Under Armour circuit. Flying across the country is not an excuse. They've been doing this all of their lives. This is not you get to 18, 19, 20 years old, now I'm tired because I play good people. You got to go out there and play every single day like you're playing at your neighborhood park and just go out there and compete.
I hear what you're both saying. I wish they would have been able to put their best foot forward. I mean, I think that's the part that is like, I mean, I don't, like when I'm sick, I don't want to do anything. Right?
But you lose by 43.
But again, well, let me finish my statement. But that doesn't account for all of it,
yes,
right?
Yes,
and
yes.
and it just hasn't been there. It just hasn't really on either end. But the defensive end I thought was particularly glaring. And again, we've talked all year about the shot selection and kind of what they do and all the threes that they shoot when they can't shoot threes. It is a little curious. Let's get to Nebraska. It's getting a bit dicey for Nebraska, Mike. Thank goodness for them that they rallied and beat Northwestern when they were down by 20 points. I mean, had they not won that game, assuming the other results would have held, they would have lost 4 in a row. They've still lost 3 of 4, a 10 seed. That was a game they really needed last night, as we have documented throughout this show. It was certainly there for the taking. Mike, give me a sense of how tenuous things are now for Nebraska.
Well, Nebraska, don't forget, the at Creighton game, the at Oregon game, those are huge wins that a lot of teams can't match. They have some other high-quality wins. And down the stretch, they do not have as demanding a schedule. And I don't think they're in the position, although Michigan on your resume would have been wonderful, especially when you played in a game that you could have won. But I don't know that they need any more quality. They just need to make sure that they don't hurt themselves, as they nearly did in that game that you mentioned. So they've got Minnesota, which is a dangerous game. Everybody in the league has found that out. They go at Ohio State, and that's sort of a game where you're playing your competition, and then they finish with Iowa. So Nebraska has to take care of business. That's at least 2 of those 3, and if you get all 3, you're comfortably in.
Yeah, you look at Nebraska right now. Bryce Williams is playing at an all-Big Ten first-team caliber level, averaging 23 points over the last 8 games. He's been phenomenal on the offensive end, but he needs help. All season long, we've talked about Nebraska, and we've talked about them needing a third scorer. Well, last night against Michigan, they needed a second scorer.
18 of 21 in the first half.
Exactly. Yeah. You think about it, Juwan Gary, if you want to be an NCAA tournament team, Juwan Gary cannot have games like he did last night. 5 points, 2 for 13 from the field. He's got to be a guy they can depend on the offensive end every time out. Andrew Morgan's got to give him something. Connor Season's got to make shots. But my guy, Bryce, needs a little bit of help.
To Mike's point, easiest remaining schedule in the Big Ten per Bart Torvik. It's the Al Davis theory. It's just win, baby. Just get a couple wins there, and you should be okay. All right, finally, Ohio State and Indiana. Mike, we mentioned off the top, both these teams are out as of now. Ohio State has been in for quite some time, but this recent losing streak puts them on the outside looking in. Indiana doesn't have the volume of wins recently, but the quality obviously has been great here with the last 2 that they've won. Give us a sense of where each one of those teams stands, what needs to happen.
Well, the advantage they have over other teams in their situation, whether it be Wake on the inside or Carolina on the outside, is they both have a significant number of high-quality wins, and that really helps. I don't think quite enough in Indiana's case. I think in Ohio State's case, it's really the record. There have only been 2 teams in the history of the NCAA tournament since '85, the expanded bracket, that have made it at 2 games over 500. Only 2. And I don't know that Ohio State's resume matches up to those 2, Villanova 91, Georgia 01. So I have them on the outside. But if they can get that back to 1 over, and that's where that Northwestern loss really hurts them, if they can get that back to 3 over by the time they get to the end of the season, I think they'll be in pretty firmly, at least into the first 4 playing in Dayton down the road. For Indiana, I think down the stretch, you're looking at a circumstance where they have some difficult games. They certainly, with that Michigan State win, it was huge. But they close with Oregon and Ohio State. A difficult game against a solid tournament team, and not an elimination game, but a game in which you are dealing with your competition. They aren't the only ones in that competition, but they are definitely teams that are fighting each other, Indiana, Ohio State, at the end to try to get a bid. So it's really interesting how the schedule worked out that they're playing each other.
Yeah, and Ohio State, I just think they got to continue to find ways to play with some pride. That Northwestern loss was embarrassing. Those guys should have met together after that game and talked about it. But I look at them on the floor, you know Bruce Thornton's going to give you some. You know Micah Parrish and Mobley Jr., they're going to be aggressive. But inside, on both ends, Devin Royal has got to give them something. You look at that Michigan game, had 26 points against maybe the best front court, maybe in the country. And then the last two games against Northwestern, against UCLA, only 10 points combined. So he's got to be a presence on both ends of the floor, both offensively and defensively. But when I look at Indiana, I'm just proud of those dudes. I'm happy for those guys to be able to put this together. They are putting themselves in position to be in position, and they're doing it with guys that you maybe not would have thought about, like Anthony Leal. I love Anthony Leal. I know Boilermakers got mad at me the other day about maybe the play he had with Caleb First, but Anthony Leal, a guy that grew up in Bloomington, grew up living his whole life having dreams to wear that Indiana jersey, and he's playing like it, and it means something to him. Luke Goody the same. Came in after going to an Elite Eight at Illinois and is fighting to get back to the tournament, and Trey Galloway just in that same reign.
Those are three guys who grew up wanting to be Hoosiers,
yes.
right? And you certainly see it in the way they play. It would be an amazing story if Indiana didn't just make the NCAA tournament, made a bit of a run.
That'd be crazy.
In the NCAA tournament, but there's a lot needs to happen between now and then. Rafael, Mike, great stuff. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it. And Mike will be looking for that seed list every day because, as we know, things can change. We're going to shift gears to hockey next. A lot happening as we hit the final weekend of the regular season. Who better to sort it out for us than Paul Caponegri? He joins me for 2 segments. Talking Pucks next. Big Ten hockey heading into the final weekend of the regular season. Minnesota now on top after Michigan State lost twice to Penn State last weekend. Gophers with a 2-point lead over the Spartans. Ohio State 6 points back. Then Michigan and Penn State neck and neck in the battle for 4th place, which, remember, would give you home ice for the first round of the conference tourney. Paul Caponegri is here. We got to start with Penn State. I mean, this is turning into an amazing story.
I mean, that's fun, right? You like to see this and continue to happen.
Yeah.
We talked last week. We're like,
Yes.
maybe they can get one.
Can you steal one game?
And they almost got
5
both.
points. Yeah, they get 5 points out of a trip to the number 1 team in the country.
Yeah.
You know, there's still, I mean, we'll get
They
into.
were 0-8 to start the conference
Yeah, 0-8
season.
to start the conference season. So how do you explain what's going on here?
I think some growth from some young players offensively. They have maybe the best player in the country, Aiden Fink, who's the leading scorer in the country,
Right.
but their goaltender. That's where they've struggled in the past. They've always been a scoring team, but when they've struggled is they're not getting the goaltending. And right now they're not just getting good goaltending, they got great goaltending this weekend. Arseny Sergeyev came in as a transfer, and he was good early, then he got hurt. Then they weren't winning at all, and now he's been back, and he's found his rhythm. And this team now is you could just see the confidence in them behind him, or in front of him, excuse me. And they got the tie, and then the point Friday. Right. I think Saturday, this is going to be tough because Michigan State didn't play that well, but they got a couple bounces early, scored. They scored early. Some very Michigan State players were like, what's going on here? But they took advantage of it. Michigan State played better later in the game, but Arseny Sergeyev was just lights out. So their formula right now is getting timely scoring from the right guys in their team and then getting great goaltending.
When you give up goals on the first 2 shots of the game, it's tough to rally.
And really kind of handed them to them, too, which is totally uncharacteristic.
Okay, so give people a sense for Penn State. So this is their best streak since the advent of Big Ten hockey, best 6-game streak in conference play, and yet still on the outside looking into the NCAA tournament, right? They're 15 pairwise.
And that's what hurts them is it's computers deciding. Because if it was Mike DeCourcy, he'd be saying, oh, no, this team is in because they're red hot. You know, human would say you're in, but the computers right now, they're still battling themselves back into that.
So we'll get into this weekend coming up for them, but suffice to say, they still have a lot of work to do. What do you make of Michigan State? You talk about some self-inflicted wounds in that game. What
I mean, you know what?
Really the whole weekend.
They've been so consistent most of the year. I just think it wasn't a great weekend. And then also the fact they had a bad start. They gave up the 2 goals early, but they played really well after that. They just could not beat the goaltender, and that's hockey sometimes. They got 2 late goals to almost come back. I think they needed another 3 minutes in the game, and they might have been able to tie it up. But I just lump it in as, you know what, it's a long season. You're not always going to play well. It was tough that I was doing it on senior night that they lost, but
Right.
they have some big goals ahead of them. I don't think a lot has changed.
And then there was just so much at stake, too,
Sure.
right? The chance to win.
And you've got a hot team in
back-to-back
front of you. That just
Yes.
sometimes happens. You can't help that.
Yeah. They head to Notre Dame this weekend, and we'll talk a little bit about that. There's going to be some emotion,
Sure,
certainly
big
for
time.
Notre Dame, and we can get into it, but obviously if there's a team you want to play with all due respect.
I think
this
it'll
year
be. I
in
think
the
it'll
Big
help
Ten,
them
it's Notre
juice
Dame.
them up a little bit too.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Minnesota, they took advantage
Yeah.
of Michigan State's stumbles, and so now they are in first place. We were talking about how well Ohio State was
Yeah.
playing, and
Yeah.
man, Minnesota just took it to them. What did you take watching the Gophers?
I took away that they look like they're sensing that the playoffs and the important part of the season is coming. It's just the way it is with them. Their expectations every year is national championship. So it's hard to keep your focus week in and week out. The talent is just overwhelmingly there, and it looked like it happened this week. They just played very steady, and Liam Soulier did what he had to do in net. The Buckeyes have played well. They're just having a rough time against the top teams, and Minnesota just really played a complete weekend, and you can see maybe, March is only a week away, and you could kind of tell they played that way.
So to your point on Ohio State, because it's been a great story this
Yeah.
year, right? It's been one of the best stories in the league, and yet 2-6 against Minnesota and Michigan State on the year.
Yeah.
Is that a reflection of bad matchups, or is there a drop-off between those two and the Buckeyes?
Yeah, I think if they're playing their best game, I think those two teams are better. But Ohio State's done. It's kind of like they played exactly to what they should have. They're not beating the teams that maybe are a little better than them,
Right.
but they're beating everyone else pretty much. They went 11-2-1 against the other teams in the Big Ten, and those 2 losses were overtime losses. So they have not lost in regulation to anyone in conference play other than Michigan State. Minnesota, they'll face Michigan this weekend, who they beat and then lost in an overtime game. So the Buckeyes are a solid team. They have to go everything go right against those top teams in my mind.
I'm really interested to talk about that series against Michigan. I know you're going to be on the call. We're going to take a quick break, and then we are going to talk about this whole weekend because there's definitely some drama
It's gonna be fun.
involved in it. The dramatic conclusion of our show next. We're going to dive into the action. Cappy tells us what he'll be watching most closely as we prepare to crown a regular season champ. Weekend of the Big Ten hockey regular season coming up. Michigan and Ohio State play in Columbus Thursday and Friday. Cappy going to be on the call for those on the Big Ten Network. We got 2 Friday-Saturday series, Michigan State, Notre Dame, and Minnesota, Penn State. Wisconsin has completed its regular season. Let's run through this in the 5 minutes or so we have left here, Cappy. Biggest stakes maybe in State College. You got Penn State trying to get into the NCAA tourney, and Minnesota trying to win the Big Ten.
Yeah.
So break this down for us.
I mean, you have the hottest team probably in the Big Ten in Penn State. You have
Right.
a Minnesota team coming off a terrific home series against Ohio State. Like I said, sensing the playoffs coming, can win the Big Ten title, get the home ice. I don't think Michigan State or Minnesota are excited about winning the Big Ten title for the bye, but I think the biggest thing is they would have the home game for the championship. I think that's where you want that first place the most, is having that title game on your home ice. With this game, Penn State, they're playing for their lives. At this point, they moved up only 1 spot in the pairwise after they beat Michigan State and tied them. So I think they need to win both or almost the same if they want to move up. I mean, we're talking decimal points. The problem is the teams around them are playing tough teams. So they're not, there's no bad losses. So it's really close.
But amazing, like you go to Munn, it's a number 1 team in the country.
And number 2 in the pairwise, but still right there.
Yeah.
And road games are weighted more.
Right.
So you kind of just toss your hands up a little with it. But the big story, I think, is Liam Soulier, the goalie for Minnesota, played 4 years at Penn State and will now be coming back. So how will he react? I mean, you never know for sure on that. He's the goalie, too. The crowd will probably be on him a little extra. Pagula will be rocking. That's kind of the one kind of X factor in the game is how is it his emotions be coming back to Penn State.
So we'll see how Minnesota fares as they try to wrap up the Big
Yeah.
Ten. Michigan State will obviously be looking for Penn State to continue to play well. I mentioned they go to Notre Dame, and you would say, okay, well, Notre Dame's playing out the string, except for the fact that Jeff Jackson is stepping down, as we've known all year here. This is one of the winningest coaches, in fact, the winningest active coach in college hockey.
20 years at Notre Dame.
Yeah, pretty amazing, right? Yeah. So to what extent, if any, do you think that could be a factor and make this maybe a little more challenging than it appears on paper?
I just think emotions sometimes win out. And it's hard to say. 20 years there, he built that arena. The Compton Family Ice Center is fabulous hockey rink. 4 Frozen Fours, 2 final games, wasn't able to get over the hump. But I just think you just never know that last night. They have 10, 11 seniors, too, going out. That's where you got to watch out because I think Michigan State's going to come out really feisty Friday night. It's can they do it Saturday, and then you'll know obviously where you are in stakes. What happens at Penn State, Minnesota Friday night. So there's a lot there. It's not so slam dunk when you look at first or second against Notre Dame, who struggled the most. And they're coming off a win at Wisconsin 6-1, so a little feel there. But yeah, it's a little different when it's not just, coaches going out and there's, the place is going to be, I'm sure, packed for him and there's going to be a huge send-off. So the emotion could swing it, I think, in their favor maybe Saturday night.
Want to get into Michigan, Ohio State. You're going to be calling this series on the Big Ten Network over the weekend. These two teams are tied for 10th in the pairwise.
Yes, Michigan won last weekend. They didn't play.
Yeah,
they went from 12 to 10. They won the
They
weekend.
move up 2 spots, and Penn State wins 2 road games?
And I'll tell you why. Michigan's non-conference schedule was maybe the hard. If it's not the hardest, it was the second hardest. All the teams they played. So they're playing tough teams all year. So they're winning by other teams winning. That's how that kind of works. But yeah, no, Michigan and Ohio State are 10 tie. I think Ohio State would be ahead of them when the percentages. But it's going to be an interesting weekend. Buckeyes, were hot. Then they get, humbled a little bit at Minnesota. So I see them coming out. And then Michigan's coming off a bye week. You kind of, Michigan State struggled off of that last week. It'll be interesting. The rivalry takes into effect, too. So I think they're having a Scarlet out in Columbus. Both teams desperately need this. I think Michigan maybe a little more, but they're already locked into playing Penn State in the first round series.
Right.
So, and that whole pairwise thing comes into play. So you're kind of looking at both. It's kind of weird how you're constantly looking at conference and that, but Michigan's kind of locked in. Now they're fighting for home ice.
Yes.
In that first round.
You desperately want that home ice, obviously, in that first series, right? I mean,
common sense. You don't want to go into a hostile Pagula like it's going to be rocking with 6,000. You want 6,000 rocking at Yost, right? Instead.
And especially, again, given Michigan's probably solidly in the NCAA tournament, whereas Penn State will be playing for its life.
A little bit more.
How many Big Ten teams do you think ultimately get in this tournament?
I think 4, and then Penn State's the, carrot on top.
Right.
So maybe 5.
It's
4,
amazing.
maybe 5.
Would never
but 2
have
number
said
1
that.
seeds, too, which is awesome. Minnesota and Michigan State are locked number 1s.
Awesome. All right, we'll have great calls this weekend.
Thanks, Dave. Appreciate
Kathy.
it.
Thanks so much for watching Big Ten Today.